Prince Andrew is facing increasing pressure to move out of the Royal Lodge at Windsor, with representatives of King Charles reportedly in talks over the disgraced royal's home.
For more than 2 decades, Royal Lodge in Windsor stood as one of the crown jewels of the British royal family, a home symbolising history, prestige and power. But in October 2025, everything changed in a way that shocked the monarchy and the world alike. King Charles took the unprecedented step of stripping his younger brother of all titles and honours, while simultaneously initiating an eviction that has captivated the public and left royal watchers reeling. What truly happened when Buckingham Palace demanded the surrender of Royal Lodge, triggering what is being called the deepest royal rift in over a century? Let's unravel the full story of Andrew's eviction from Royal Lodge, decades of residence, the infamous peppercorn rent scandal, and the domino effect that turned a historic royal estate into a media spectacle. Royal Lodge wasn't just another royal home. The Grade 2 listed Georgian mansion, nestled within the sprawling Windsor Great Park, was a residence of dreams. 30 luxuriously appointed rooms, 7 bedrooms, a grand drawing room, a sunken garden, and even a private chapel. There was a swimming pool, an aviary, 6 lodge cottages, and quarters for protection officers. Beyond its opulence, Royal Lodge carried immense sentimental weight. It had been the childhood home of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, and later the residence of the Queen Mother until her passing in 2002. Andrew moved into Royal Lodge in 2003 under a favourable 75-year lease agreement scheduled to run until June 15, 2078. The upfront cost, £1 million. The annual rent, a peppercorn sum, practically symbolic, almost nothing. In 2008, his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson moved back in, and for years the divorced couple cohabited the mansion. Life seemed calm until 2024, when details of the peppercorn rent arrangement leaked to the public. Outrage erupted. Ordinary British citizens were facing a brutal cost-of-living crisis. Yet Andrew was essentially living rent-free in a multi-million-pound estate while surrounded by scandal. Public pressure mounted for his removal, and the monarchy's modernising efforts clashed head-on with centuries-old traditions of privilege. Reports indicate that King Charles had tried months of diplomacy, persuading Andrew to relocate to a smaller residence like Frogmore Cottage. Andrew, confident in his lease, refused. Then Virginia Giuffre's memoir hit the shelves, bringing renewed scrutiny to Andrew's ties with Jeffrey Epstein. The pressure on Charles intensified. The public demanded action, but enforcing Andrew's exit was far more complicated than anticipated. The historic turning point came on October 30th, 2025. Buckingham Palace released a statement making global headlines. His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honours of Prince Andrew. From that moment on, Andrew would be known as Andrew Man Windsor. The statement addressed Royal Lodge directly. While the lease had previously protected him, formal notice had now been served, requiring him to surrender the property and move to alternative private accommodation. The palace emphasised that the measures were necessary, even as Andrew continued to deny all allegations against him. Most importantly, the palace stressed that the King and Queen stood with victims and survivors of abuse, signalling clear support for those affected over Andrew himself. Stripping a royal of their titles is an almost unheard-of move. The last instance occurred in 1917, when Prince Charles Edward, Queen Victoria's grandson, lost the Duke of Albany title after siding with Germany in World War I. King Charles's decision underscored the gravity of the situation. Andrew was given at least 12 months to move, with a deadline of October 2026. However, sources said Charles hoped for a quicker exit, ideally by Easter 2026. Sarah Ferguson lost her courtesy title alongside Andrew, leaving her leaning heavily on daughters Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie for emotional support. Meanwhile, questions arose about whether Andrew could claim compensation for the millions he spent renovating Royal Lodge. The Crown Estate began assessing the property to calculate potential repayment. But as details emerged, the compensation discussion took a shocking turn. Reports described a hoarding crisis inside Royal Lodge, turning a straightforward eviction into an extraordinary undertaking. Rooms were piled to the ceilings with documents, photographs, and personal effects collected over decades. Friends said that even if Andrew had wanted to leave immediately, the sheer volume of items made it impossible. The process required careful sorting, cataloguing, and decisions about what to store, keep, or discard. What was meant to be a short transition now threatened to drag well past Andrew's 66th birthday on February 19, 2026. The hoarding also raised questions about Andrew's mental state. Since stepping back from royal duties in 2019, he reportedly retreated into his collections as a way to stay connected to his former life. His accumulation of items, once perhaps a source of comfort, had become a barrier to leaving. Moving to a smaller residence would be emotionally and logistically challenging. Andrew's new home, Marsh Farm, offered a stark contrast. Located in Wilton, 2 miles from Sandringham House, Marsh Farm had been unoccupied for years following the previous tenant farmer's death. The property was run down and required extensive renovation. For a man used to 30 rooms, multiple amenities, and sprawling grounds, Marsh Farm represented drastic downsizing. While Andrew reportedly would have preferred Prince Philip's former wood farm, its proximity to the family made it unsuitable. Marsh Farm allowed the Crown to isolate Andrew while still providing accommodation, a clear balance of pragmatism and symbolic distance. By January 2026, restoration crews descended on Marsh Farm, braving rain and mud to install new security features, repair structural damage, and prepare the farmhouse for habitation. A 6-foot fence replaced old barbed wire, and CCTV cameras were installed throughout the property. Inside, workmen patched leaks, upgraded electrical systems, and made the home habitable for someone accustomed to a very different standard of living. The Crown Estate concluded Andrew would likely receive no compensation for the early surrender of the Royal Lodge lease. Despite the £1 million upfront payment and millions more invested in renovations, the property's condition, combined with the hoarding, meant repayment was unlikely. The hoarding inside Royal Lodge had created a monumental challenge. Rooms stacked with documents and personal effects required careful, painstaking excavation. Every item had to be sorted: keep, discard, or store. For Andrew, it was not just a physical move, but an emotional journey, parting with decades of accumulated memories. Friends noted the sheer scope of possessions reflected both nostalgia and retreat from public life, showing a man grappling with isolation and personal scandal. Meanwhile, Marsh Farm's renovations revealed more stark contrasts. From grand Georgian luxury to a modest working farmhouse, Andrew faced a new reality. Security measures, tighter space, and the necessity of downsizing belongings underscored the loss of privilege. Daily life would be more constrained, privacy limited, and freedom curtailed, a dramatic shift from Royal Lodge. The Royal Lodge saga has broader implications. It demonstrates King Charles's willingness to act decisively for the monarchy's reputation and public accountability. No royal is untouchable, and difficult decisions can be made even against a family member when public scrutiny and scandal demand action. Andrew's transition illustrates how personal legacy, public perception, and institutional integrity intersect in the modern monarchy. Media coverage of the move amplified public fascination. Eviction trucks, storage vans, and teams of workmen have been seen at both Royal Lodge and Marsh Farm, each symbolising a transformation of status, privilege, and lifestyle. The months-long excavation of Andrew's possessions offered a rare window into the private life of a royal under pressure, exposing a man clinging to material remnants of a past life while facing a dramatically smaller and more secure future. As Marsh Farm neared completion, Andrew's life took on a completely different pace. He would trade the sprawling grounds and 30 rooms of Royal Lodge for the confines of a renovated farmhouse. Many possessions would be stored or discarded, creating a tangible sense of loss. The transition is not only about space, it is about adapting to a life that is smaller, more isolated, and far more scrutinized than before. Observers and friends noted the emotional toll. Downsizing, coping with public attention, and adjusting to reduced freedom all contributed to a significant psychological impact. The move highlighted both the human side of royal privilege and the consequences of scandal. The months of detailed work, Sorting, cataloguing, and relocating belongings became as much a mental and emotional journey as a logistical challenge. Royal Lodge's story is more than an eviction. It reflects history, scandal, public outrage, family tension, and the personal realities of life under intense scrutiny. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's journey from a grand royal mansion to a modest farmhouse demonstrates how privilege, personal choices, and public pressure collide. Even as restoration crews work tirelessly, installing fences, security cameras, and modern amenities, the contrast between Royal Lodge and Marsh Farm remains stark. Andrew's life has been dramatically reduced in scale, highlighting the reality of consequences even for those once shielded by royal status. The move underscores the ongoing struggle between personal legacy, public expectation, and institutional accountability, reminding the world that even a prince cannot escape the repercussions of scandal. And even with the renovations nearly complete, the contrast between Royal Lodge and Marsh Farm serves as a stark reminder of the dramatic fall from royal grace, the intricacies of hoarding, and the logistical nightmare of relocating a lifetime of possessions. While restoration crews continue to work tirelessly, installing fences, cameras, and security systems throughout the property, the reality of Andrew's downsized existence has begun to take shape. A life far removed from the splendour of his former residence, yet contained within the watchful eyes of the Crown and the public. When Andrew first set eyes on Marsh Farm, it quickly became clear that this property was a far cry from the grand royal lodge he had called home for more than 2 decades. From the outset, the estate lacked essential facilities, including proper garaging for his collection of luxury cars, a detail that didn't sit well with him. Add to that the absence of adequate living space for full-time staff, and it became apparent that Andrew's support network would need to be reimagined. King Charles, ever pragmatic, arranged to provide a cleaner, a groundsman, and a cook from Sandringham on an ad hoc basis to look after Andrew's needs. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliam suggested this arrangement was deliberate, noting that keeping Andrew near Sandringham offered a subtle form of control, allowing the monarchy to oversee him while limiting his independence. Yet, these practical inconveniences were only the beginning. What would shake royal insiders to their core were the environmental assessments revealing Marsh Farm's alarming vulnerabilities. In January 2026, reports surfaced that the property sat on a floodplain, placing Andrew's future home at significant risk during heavy rainfall or storm conditions. The revelation sent shockwaves across royal circles. According to a 2024 flood risk assessment for nearby Wilton Barnes, just metres from Marsh Farm, the Environment Agency maintained a flood warning system designed to protect properties like Andrew's from catastrophic damage. The assessment included stark warnings. Mechanical failure of the Wolferton pumping station or power outages could leave properties inundated, with emergency measures deployed only as a last resort. The timing of this news couldn't have been worse. Storm Chandra swept across Britain with ferocious winds and heavy rain, forcing King Charles to close the children's play area at Sandringham Estate due to unsafe conditions. Royal watchers immediately noted that Andrew's move to Marsh Farm placed him squarely in harm's way. Literally, the flood risk highlighted serious questions about the king's decision-making. Had environmental dangers been adequately evaluated? Was the risk deliberate, perhaps to subtly pressure Andrew into leaving the United Kingdom entirely? Some commentators didn't rule out this possibility, interpreting the location choice as a calculated move within a strategy to contain him both physically and symbolically. As the flood concerns dominated headlines, another challenge emerged: security. Marsh Farm, a remote property 2 miles from Sandringham, lacked the established protections of Royal Lodge. Experts warned it would be far harder to secure, prompting authorities to extend the Sandringham no-fly zone to include Marsh Farm. This move, formalised in September 2025, restricted drone flights over the property, reflecting lessons learned from March 2025, when drones were spotted during Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit. The proactive measures demonstrated the monarchy's heightened awareness of risks, yet experts still questioned whether Marsh Farm could ever match the fortified infrastructure and rapid response capabilities of Royal Lodge. Security aside, the financial and logistical burden also loomed large. Sources indicated that King Charles intended to fund Andrew's new accommodation and security privately, rather than drawing on public resources. While fiscally responsible in some ways, this represented a significant ongoing expense. Critics suggested it might have been more practical and more cost-effective to let Andrew remain at Royal Lodge, where security, staff and infrastructure were already in place. Yet, the royal strategy seemed determined. Andrew's life would now be smaller, more controlled, and under closer observation. Amid these upheavals, the most personal blow came from Sarah Ferguson. The former couple had maintained a surprisingly close relationship since their 1996 divorce, with Sarah supporting Andrew through scandal and upheaval. She had lived at Royal Lodge since 2008, serving as companion and stabilising presence. But by January 2026, exclusive reports revealed that Sarah would not move with Andrew to Marsh Farm. A source explained, "Andrew and Sarah have to move out by the 25th of January. She has stood by him all these years, but now she's ready to spread her wings." Losing her daily companionship marked the end of a post-divorce alliance that had weathered years of public scrutiny. Sarah, sources said, planned to remain in Windsor, independent of her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, charting her own course while Andrew faced an increasingly isolated future. The separation from Sarah underscored the psychological toll of Andrew's relocation. Once accustomed to constant support, daily assistance, and the familiarity of Royal Lodge, he now faced a new reality where staff would visit sporadically, attending to chores on a schedule set by the estate. The loss of permanent live-in staff, along with dedicated gardeners, security officers, and household aides, meant Andrew would have to adapt to a life of managed convenience rather than personal autonomy. And the downsizing didn't stop there. Marsh Farm was repeatedly described by friends and insiders as a shoebox-sized property, a term used not as exaggeration, but as an accurate reflection of the staggering reduction in space and amenities. At Royal Lodge, Andrew had enjoyed a private swimming pool, a sunken garden, an aviary, and the Royal Chapel of All Saints for private worship. He had lodges for staff and guests, cottages for security and gardeners, and sprawling grounds offering unparalleled privacy. All of that vanished at Marsh Farm. The new home lacked dedicated staff accommodations, forcing Andrew to rely on personnel travelling from Sandringham for essential support. Religious privacy was gone. Visiting clergy would require travel and scheduling, increasing exposure to public scrutiny and media attention. Even garaging became a point of friction. Andrew's collection of luxury vehicles could no longer be housed conveniently, forcing adjustments and leaving him dependent on the availability of off-site storage or temporary solutions. This change, combined with the ongoing flood risks and isolated security infrastructure, painted a stark picture. Andrew's new life would be a far cry from the ease, comfort, and privacy he had known at Royal Lodge. The psychological impact of these changes cannot be overstated. Andrew was shifting from a position of entrenched privilege, where every need was anticipated, to a lifestyle dictated by limited space, staff schedules, environmental hazards, and security restrictions. Royal watchers noted that even minor inconveniences would compound, creating daily reminders of the fall from his former royal life. Marsh Farm was more than a house. It represented a tangible symbol of Andrew's altered status. Its limitations, risks, and lack of amenities underscored a dramatic loss of autonomy. From staff availability to vehicle storage, flood threats to security constraints, every detail reflected a life far removed from the comfort and stability of Royal Lodge. And despite all efforts to secure the property and provide ad hoc support, sources indicated that Andrew had yet to fully adjust. Friends reported a mix of disbelief, frustration, and resignation as the reality of downsizing, environmental risk, and reduced privileges became unavoidable. His accustomed lifestyle of near-total control over a grand estate had been replaced with a managed, highly monitored environment. The combination of isolation, limited amenities, and dependence on sporadic support threatened to take a heavy toll on Andrew's daily life, illustrating just how dramatically the transition would impact him. Ultimately, the Marsh Farm move was not just a change of residence, it was a complete redefinition of Andrew's life as a royal, highlighting the intersection of personal privilege, public accountability, and institutional control. Every logistical, environmental, and psychological challenge combined to create a scenario where Andrew would need to navigate a radically downsized, scrutinized, and closely managed future, far removed from the grandeur of his former home and the independence he once enjoyed. And in the midst of these shifts, from environmental risks to staff limitations and security concerns, Andrew faced the stark reality. The lack of suitable garaging for his luxury vehicles was yet another detail underscoring the dramatic downgrade. From the moment Andrew first set foot on Marsh Farm, it was clear that reality had delivered a harsh wake-up call. Friends and insiders repeatedly stressed that the farmhouse simply wasn't built for the lifestyle Andrew had grown accustomed to over decades of royal living. While some suggested that certain upgrades might be addressed during the ongoing refurbishments, the truth was stark. Marsh Farm lacked the luxury, scale, and conveniences of Royal Lodge. Luxury amenities, ample staff housing, private chapels, sprawling gardens, everything that had been part of his daily life was now gone. Friends said the phrase, "he really didn't want Marsh Farm," captured his deep reluctance perfectly. Yet, the formal eviction notice left Andrew with no choice. Compliance wasn't optional. Royal experts quickly interpreted King Charles's decision as a broader signal. Titles, privileges, and the royal lifestyle came with responsibilities and expectations. Fail to meet them, and the consequences would be swift, severe, and irreversible. The loss of space, staff, and amenities was only the surface. Beneath it lay an intricate strategy of isolation and control, one that hinted at long-term consequences for Andrew's place in the royal hierarchy. By placing Andrew 2 miles away from Sandringham House, King Charles was making a deliberate statement. Exile could be geographic as well as social and ceremonial. Richard Fitzwilliams, a well-known royal commentator, made this explicit, explaining that keeping Andrew nearby allowed the monarchy to monitor him, but not so close as to create awkward encounters during family events. The move was designed with precision. Every decision, from property selection to distance, reflected a carefully calculated approach to containing a disgraced royal without entirely ostracizing him. Andrew initially requested Wood Farm, Prince Philip's former retirement home, which would have provided a larger, more comfortable space and a less dramatic downgrade. However, this request was denied outright. The reason? Wood Farm was too close to the main family estate. The message was unmistakable. Andrew could live on the Sandringham estate, but only at a distance sufficient to prevent accidental encounters with other royals. The 2-mile buffer became a psychological and social boundary, signalling that while he remained a family member in name, his role, privileges, and proximity were strictly curtailed. The isolation extended beyond geography. Whereas Royal Lodge had allowed Andrew to cultivate social ties and connections over decades, Marsh Farm placed him in rural anonymity. At 65, he would be forced to rebuild a social life from scratch, without the networks he had relied upon for years. And with his daughters residing primarily in London, the physical distance further amplified the separation, removing vital sources of familial support. Friends even speculated that Andrew might consider leaving the United Kingdom entirely, seeking refuge in regions like Dubai or the UAE, where long-standing business and social contacts offered opportunities to maintain a more comfortable and discreet lifestyle. Yet even these options were complicated. Marsh Farm's shoebox reality meant Andrew would lose nearly all the comforts and privileges he had once taken for granted. Gone were the private swimming pool, aviary, sunken garden, and the Royal Chapel of All Saints. Gone were the 6 lodge cottages that had housed staff and guests, and the integrated accommodation for protection officers and gardeners. Gone was the convenience of live-in staff attending to every detail. Now, Andrew's support would be limited, sporadic, and fully controlled by the Sandringham estate, leaving him dependent on schedules and availability rather than personal autonomy. The psychological impact was significant. From a life of absolute control and privilege, Andrew transitioned to a managed existence defined by limitation, supervision, and uncertainty. Even practical details, like garaging his luxury cars, became sources of frustration, highlighting the dramatic downgrade. Security measures, including a 6-foot fence and CCTV installation, hinted at protection, but also underscored vulnerability, as rapid response in an emergency would always be slower than at Royal Lodge. Every detail, from flooding risks to staff shortages, reminded Andrew of his diminished circumstances. The final twist came in mid-January 2026, when sources revealed that Marsh Farm might only be temporary, an interim stop while other accommodations or renovations were finalised. This revelation injected even more uncertainty into Andrew's already precarious existence. Temporary or not, the farm symbolised the erosion of security, influence, and status. Extensive investments in fencing, surveillance, and property upgrades suggested permanence, yet the temporary label allowed the royal household to frame the move as a short-term necessity, preserving the illusion of future options for Andrew while keeping him under control in the present. The pressures of relocation, downsizing, and isolation were compounded by strict deadlines. Reports indicated Andrew was expected to complete his move before Easter, intensifying stress as he faced shrinking timelines. Public scrutiny, logistical hurdles, and the psychological toll of being stripped of titles, privileges, and proximity to family created a perfect storm of uncertainty. In this context, Marsh Farm was more than a home. It was a symbol of Andrew's dramatically altered reality. His existence had shifted from secure, entitled, and comfortable to temporary, constrained, and monitored. A life that could change at a moment's notice. Which aspect of Andrew's eviction do you find most shocking? The isolation strategy, the flood risks, or the complete loss of his royal amenities? Do you think King Charles is handling the situation appropriately? Or should the king have made different arrangements for his disgraced brother? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, don't forget to click the next video showing on your screen. You won't want to miss it.